There are moments when an entire community holds its breath, when the unthinkable happens not in the dark corners of a distant city, but on a quiet street where neighbors know each other's names. In Massachusetts, in the winter of 2008, such a moment arrived. A moment that would fracture a small town's sense of safety and leave questions hanging in the cold New England air for years. A woman vanished, not from a parking lot or a highway rest stop, but from her own home. Her car remained in the driveway. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. Her coat hung by the door. And when investigators began asking questions, the answers they received seemed reasonable at first, logical even, until they started measuring the distances, checking the times, noticing the small details that refused to align. What happened in that house on that February morning? And why did it take so long for the truth to surface? Ashland, Massachusetts sits roughly 25 miles southwest of Boston, a town of approximately 16,000 residents, where the Sudbury River winds through conservation land and colonial-era homes stand alongside modern subdivisions. In 2008, it was the kind of place where people moved to raise families, where the public schools rated well and crime remained something that happened elsewhere. The downtown consisted of a handful of shops, a pizza place, a coffee shop where regulars gathered on Saturday mornings. Route 135 cut through the center of town, carrying commuters toward the Massachusetts Turnpike and the jobs that waited in the city. On Haven Street, a residential road lined with modest single-family homes, lived the Morrison family. Sarah Morrison, 34 years old, worked part-time as a dental hygienist at a practice in Framingham. Her husband, David Morrison, 41, managed inventory for a wholesale distribution company based in Worcester. They had been married for 11 years. They had 2 children, Emma, age 9, and Connor, age 6. To those who knew them casually, they seemed unremarkable. David coached Connor's youth soccer team. Sarah volunteered at the elementary school library. They attended backyard barbecues in summer and shoveled each other's driveways when the snow came heavy. But those who knew them better noticed tension. Sarah's sister, Jennifer Caldwell, would later tell investigators that Sarah had mentioned wanting to separate. Not loudly, not with drama, but in quiet conversations over coffee, admitting that things had grown cold between her and David, that he worked late often, that they barely spoke anymore except about the children's schedules and household logistics. Jennifer said Sarah had been planning to wait until after the holidays to discuss it seriously, to avoid disrupting Christmas for Emma and Connor. February 7, 2008, arrived gray and bitter. The temperature hovered in the mid-20s. A thin layer of ice coated the sidewalks from freezing rain that had fallen overnight. Sarah Morrison woke that Thursday morning at 6:15, the same time she woke every weekday. She showered while David made coffee downstairs. She dressed in navy scrubs and pulled her dark blonde hair into a ponytail. She woke Emma and Connor at 6:45, helped Connor find his missing sneaker, reminded Emma about her spelling test. David left the house first, at 7:20, heading to his warehouse office in Worcester. The children caught the school bus at 7:55 from the corner of Haven Street and Prospect Avenue, a walk of perhaps 200 feet from their front door. Sarah stood on the porch and waved as the bus pulled away. Mrs. Patricia Hennessy, a neighbor who lived 3 houses down, saw her there. She would later tell police that Sarah wore a fleece jacket over her scrubs and that she smiled and waved in Mrs. Hennessy's direction before going back inside. That was 7:57 in the morning. It was the last confirmed sighting of Sarah Morrison alive. Sarah's first appointment at the dental practice was scheduled for 9:30. Dr. Richard Patel, the dentist she worked with, expected her to arrive by 9 to prepare the treatment rooms. When 9:15 came and went with no Sarah and no phone call, the receptionist, Amanda Torres, tried calling Sarah's cell phone. It went to voicemail. She tried the home number. No answer. By 9:45, Dr. Patel called David Morrison at his workplace. David said he did not know where Sarah was. He said she had been home when he left for work. He said she seemed fine, normal, maybe a little quiet but nothing unusual. He said he would drive home to check on her. David arrived back at the house on Haven Street at approximately 10:35, according to the timestamp on the call he placed to the Ashland Police Department. He told the dispatcher that his wife's car was in the driveway, that the front door had been unlocked, that her purse and cell phone were inside, that she was not there. The dispatcher asked if there were signs of a struggle. David said no. She asked if anything appeared missing or out of place. David said no, everything looked normal. She asked if his wife had any medical conditions or reasons she might wander off. David said no, nothing like that. Officer Michael Russo arrived at 11:05. He walked through the house with David Morrison. The living room appeared tidy. Dishes sat in the drying rack beside the kitchen sink. A coffee mug, still half full, rested on the counter. Sarah's cell phone lay on the kitchen table, plugged into its charger. Her purse sat on a chair. Her wallet inside contained her driver's license, credit cards, $43 in cash. Her winter coat hung on a hook by the back door. Her car keys sat in a small bowl on the hallway table. Officer Russo asked David to walk him through the morning again. David repeated what he had told Dr. Patel and the dispatcher. He had left at 7:20 to drive to Worcester. Sarah had been in the kitchen drinking coffee. The children had been getting ready for school. Everything had been normal. He had kissed Sarah goodbye. He had driven to work. He had been there all morning until Dr. Patel called. Russo asked if they had argued recently. David said no more than any married couple. Russo asked if Sarah had seemed upset or depressed. David said she had been tired lately, stressed about work, but nothing alarming. Russo asked if there was anyone Sarah might go to if she needed to get away for a few hours. David mentioned Sarah's sister Jennifer, who lived in Newton. Russo called Jennifer. She had not heard from Sarah. She said she would drive over immediately. By early afternoon, more officers had arrived. They searched the house again, this time more thoroughly. They checked closets, the basement, the garage. They looked for signs of forced entry. They found none. They looked for blood, for anything suggesting violence. They found nothing. They walked the property, checking the yard, the neighbors' yards, the small wooded area behind the houses. They found no footprints in the frozen ground beyond those leading to and from the street. Jennifer Caldwell arrived at 1:40 and collapsed into sobs when she saw the police cars. She told Officer Russo that her sister would never just leave, especially not without her phone or coat in this weather. She said Sarah was responsible, reliable, that she lived for her children. She said something must have happened to her. By late afternoon, the Ashland police requested assistance from the Massachusetts State Police. Detective Sergeant Thomas Brennan arrived at 4:15 to take over coordination. He ordered a wider search of the neighborhood. Officers went door to door, asking if anyone had seen Sarah Morrison that morning, if anyone had noticed vehicles that did not belong, strangers, anything unusual. Mrs. Patricia Hennessy repeated what she had seen. Sarah on the porch at 7:57, waving to the school bus. Another neighbor, Mr. Harold Chen, said he had been leaving for work around 8:15 and had seen Sarah's car in the driveway but had not seen Sarah herself. No one reported hearing screams, arguments, or anything that sounded like a disturbance. Detective Brennan sat down with David Morrison at 5:30 in the living room. He asked David to account for his movements in detail. David said he left the house at 7:20. He drove his usual route, Haven Street to Route 135, Route 135 to the Mass Pike, the Mass Pike West to Exit 10, then Route 290 north to Worcester. He arrived at the warehouse at approximately 8:25. He swiped his security badge at 8:27, which the company's electronic records would confirm. He had been in his office or on the warehouse floor all morning. Coworkers could verify his presence. Brennan asked about the marriage. David admitted they had been having difficulties. He said Sarah had been distant. He said they had discussed counseling but had not followed through. He said he loved his wife and wanted to work things out. He began to cry. The search continued into the evening. Volunteers from the community joined police in combing the conservation land near the Sudbury River. They used flashlights and called Sarah's name into the darkness. They found nothing. Emma and Connor were picked up from school by Jennifer Caldwell, who took them to her home in Newton so they would not have to see the police presence at their house. By midnight, Sarah Morrison had been missing for approximately 16 hours. Her face would soon appear on the local news. Flyers would go up on telephone poles throughout Ashland and surrounding towns. A Facebook page would be created, shared thousands of times, and investigators would begin to notice the small details that did not quite fit. Part 2. The investigation. The dawn of February 8th brought television news crews to Haven Street. Reporters stood in front of the Morrison house doing live shots for the morning broadcasts. The story had everything that captured public attention. A mother of two, vanished without a trace, no signs of struggle, her personal belongings left behind. By noon, the case had spread beyond local coverage to the Boston network affiliates and cable news crawls. Detective Sergeant Brennan established a command post at the Ashland Police Department. The Massachusetts State Police Detective Unit assigned 3 additional investigators to the case. The FBI offered assistance, which Brennan accepted, bringing in specialists in missing persons cases. Volunteers arrived in such numbers that police had to organize them into grid search teams. More than 200 people spent that Friday walking through the woods, checking drainage ditches, peering into abandoned buildings. David Morrison appeared at a press conference at 3 in the afternoon. He stood beside Jennifer Caldwell, who did most of the talking. David's face appeared drawn, pale. His hands shook slightly as he held a framed photograph of Sarah. When reporters asked him directly if he had any idea where his wife might be, he said no, his voice barely above a whisper. He said he just wanted her to come home safely. He said Emma and Connor needed their mother. Those who watched the press conference would later disagree about David's demeanor. Some found him appropriately devastated. Others thought he seemed detached, almost mechanical in his responses. A reporter from the Boston Herald noted in her article that David made little eye contact and that his affect appeared flat. But grief, investigators knew, manifested differently in different people. Some collapsed. Some went numb. Some threw themselves into action. Demeanor alone proved nothing. Behind the scenes, Detective Brennan and his team were building a timeline, and the timeline was presenting problems. David Morrison said he left the house at 7:20 in the morning. The drive from Ashland to his workplace in Worcester covered approximately 31 miles via the route David described taking. At that time of morning, with normal traffic conditions, the drive should take between 35 and 45 minutes. David said he arrived at work at approximately 8:25, and his security badge swipe at 8:27 confirmed his arrival at the building. Brennan had an investigator drive the exact route at 7:20 the following Monday morning to test the timing. The drive took 41 minutes, arriving at 8:01. Even accounting for traffic variation, David's timeline was possible, though tight. But there was something else. On February 7th, the Mass Pike had experienced a traffic incident near exit 11A in Millbury. A tractor-trailer had jackknifed at approximately 7:45 in the morning, blocking 2 lanes of westbound traffic. State police traffic reports indicated the incident caused delays of up to 30 minutes for vehicles traveling westbound toward Worcester between approximately 7:50 and 9:15. If David had left Ashland at 7:20 and taken his usual route, he should have encountered this traffic backup. Brennan's team checked traffic camera footage from the pike. They could not find David's vehicle in the footage, though the cameras did not capture every vehicle and the footage quality was poor. Still, if David had been stuck in that backup, arriving at work by 8:27 would have been nearly impossible. When Brennan asked David about the traffic that morning, David said he did not remember hitting any significant delays. He said maybe he had gotten through before the worst of it. When pressed, he said he honestly could not recall specific details about the drive. He said his mind had been on other things. Brennan moved on to other questions. He asked about Sarah's state of mind in the days before her disappearance. David said she had seemed normal. When investigators spoke separately to Jennifer Caldwell, she said Sarah had seemed anxious. She said Sarah had called her on February 5th, 2 days before she vanished, and had said she needed to talk about something important but wanted to wait until they could meet in person. They had planned to have lunch the following week. Brennan asked what Sarah wanted to discuss. Jennifer said she assumed it was about the marriage. She said Sarah had mentioned possibly filing for separation. She said Sarah was worried about how David would react, how it would affect the children. When Brennan brought this up with David, David admitted that he knew Sarah was unhappy. He said he had hoped they could work through it. He said he would never have hurt her. He said the idea was absurd. Investigators searched David's vehicle, a 2005 Honda Accord. They found nothing unusual. They searched Sarah's vehicle, a 2007 Toyota Camry. They found her dental hygienist supplies, a box of granola bars, an umbrella, Emma's forgotten sweatshirt in the back seat. They found no blood, no signs of struggle, nothing suspicious. They checked David's cell phone records. He had made no calls the morning of February 7th, except the one to Dr. Patel around 9:45 after being contacted at work. His GPS data, which the phone provider was able to partially reconstruct, showed movement consistent with his claimed route to Worcester, though the data had gaps and was not definitive. They checked Sarah's cell phone, which remained in the house. Her last outgoing call had been at 6:32 the previous evening, to her mother in Florida, a brief conversation about the children. Her last text message had been sent at 9:15 the previous night to a coworker, confirming their schedule for the next day. They interviewed Sarah's coworkers at the dental practice. All described her as dependable, kind, professional. None knew of any problems in her personal life beyond what she had mentioned in passing about marriage stress. None could think of any reason she would simply leave. They interviewed David's coworkers at the warehouse. Most described him as quiet, competent, someone who kept to himself. His supervisor said David's performance had been solid, no complaints. When asked if David had seemed stressed recently, the supervisor said maybe a little distracted, but nothing alarming. Days became a week. The massive search efforts yielded nothing. No body, no clothing, no additional witnesses. The case began to appear on national news programs, brief segments between commercial breaks. Sarah's photograph became one more face among the missing. Detective Brennan kept returning to the timeline. He could not make it work cleanly. If David left at 7:20, encountered the traffic backup on the pike, and still arrived at work by 8:27, something did not fit. But without definitive proof that David's vehicle had been caught in that backup, Brennan had only suspicion, not evidence. Those who knew David said different things. His brother, Mark Morrison, told reporters that David was incapable of violence, that the police were wasting time looking at him when they should be searching for whoever had taken Sarah. Sarah's sister Jennifer said quietly to investigators that she had never liked David, that something about him had always seemed off, though she could not articulate exactly what. In the third week of the investigation, investigators brought in cadaver dogs to search the Morrison property and the surrounding area. The dogs showed interest in a spot in the basement near the furnace, but did not give a definitive alert. Investigators excavated the area, finding nothing but bare concrete and dirt. David Morrison hired an attorney on February 26th, which was his right, though it struck some investigators as notable. He stopped speaking directly to police without his lawyer present. He issued a statement through his attorney expressing his continued cooperation with the investigation and his desperate hope that Sarah would be found safe. By March, the daily search operations had ended. The case remained active, assigned to Detective Brennan, but the intense focus had shifted. The television crews packed up. The volunteer search team stopped organizing. The Facebook page updates became less frequent. Sarah Morrison had joined the ranks of the missing, her case open, her fate unknown. Emma and Connor Morrison remained with Jennifer Caldwell for several weeks before returning to live with their father in the house on Haven Street. Jennifer fought for custody, but had no legal grounds without evidence of wrongdoing. David attended counseling mandated by Child Protective Services, which found no reason to remove the children from his care. Life, in its strange way, continued. Part 3. The Silence. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the weight of suspicion sitting in your chest like a stone, you understand the particular kind of torment that doubt creates. It offers no resolution, no clear path forward. It simply sits there, growing heavier with each passing day. 16 months after Sarah Morrison disappeared, in June of 2009, David Morrison sold the house on Haven Street. He told neighbors he could not bear to stay there anymore, that every room held memories that had become unbearable. He moved with Emma and Connor to Marlborough, a town about 12 miles west, into a rental apartment in a complex near Lake Williams. Jennifer Caldwell visited the children regularly, picking them up for weekends, taking them to the park, to the movies, anywhere she could spend time with them and watch for signs of trauma, of knowledge they were too young or too frightened to articulate. She watched Connor especially. He had been 6 when his mother vanished. He was now 7, and he had stopped talking about Sarah almost entirely. When Jennifer asked Connor if he missed his mom, he would nod but say nothing. When she asked if he remembered the morning his mom went away, he would shake his head and change the subject. Emma, who was now 10, seemed more willing to engage, but even she had constructed walls around the topic. She told Jennifer once that she tried not to think about it too much because thinking about it made her stomach hurt. In therapy sessions, which Jennifer insisted David maintain for the children, Connor drew pictures. His therapist, Dr. Linda Shapiro, noted in her records that many of Connor's drawings featured houses with prominent doors and windows. In one drawing, a figure stood in a doorway, facing inward, while another figure lay on the floor inside. When Dr. Shapiro asked Connor about the drawing, he said it was just a picture. It did not mean anything. When she asked who the people were, he said he did not know, he just drew them. David Morrison went to work, came home, made dinner, helped with homework. To outward appearances, he was managing. Colleagues at the warehouse said he seemed to be doing as well as could be expected. He did not date. He did not socialize beyond necessary interactions. He existed in a kind of suspended state, going through the motions of parenthood and employment while the investigation into his wife's disappearance continued in the background. Detective Brennan never stopped working the case, though his active hours on it decreased as other cases demanded attention. He reviewed the file quarterly, looking for anything he might have missed. He kept in touch with Jennifer Caldwell, who called him monthly to ask if there were any updates. There never were. In November 2010, a body was found in the Quabbin Reservoir, approximately 60 miles from Ashland. The remains were badly decomposed, and initial reports suggested they might belong to a woman. Jennifer Caldwell braced herself for confirmation she both dreaded and needed. DNA testing ruled it out. The body belonged to a woman who had gone missing from Springfield 3 years earlier. Jennifer felt guilty for her sense of relief. David and Jennifer's relationship deteriorated completely by 2011. She accused him directly, during a tense exchange in the parking lot of the McDonald's where they met for custody exchanges, of knowing what happened to Sarah. He denied it, his voice rising to a shout for one of the few times anyone had witnessed. He said he loved Sarah. He said he would never have hurt her. He said Jennifer's accusations were poisoning his children against him. Jennifer said the children already knew. She said they might not be able to articulate it yet, but children understood more than adults gave them credit for. She said Connor woke up screaming from nightmares. She said Emma had developed anxiety so severe she could not sleep without a light on. David said that was because Jennifer kept bringing up their mother, kept asking them questions, kept preventing them from moving forward. He said Jennifer was making everything worse. After that exchange, David restricted Jennifer's access to the children. She could see them twice a month, supervised, and no discussions about Sarah were permitted. Jennifer consulted with attorneys about pursuing grandparents' rights, though she was not the children's grandmother but their aunt. She learned she had limited legal standing. Without evidence that David was an unfit parent, courts were unlikely to intervene. The evidence that Jennifer felt certain existed, the knowledge she believed the children carried, was not something she could prove. For those who have noticed how children protect the adults they depend on, even when those adults have done terrible things, you understand the impossible position Emma and Connor were in. They lived with their father. They needed their father. Speaking against him, revealing what they might know or suspect, could destroy the only stability they had left. In therapy, Connor continued to draw. In one session in March 2012, when he was 10 years old, he drew a picture of a car. Inside the car sat 2 stick figures. Dr. Shapiro asked who they were. Connor said it was his dad driving somewhere. She asked who the other person was. Connor stared at the paper for a long time. Then he said he did not remember drawing 2 people. Maybe he made a mistake. He scribbled over the second figure until it was just a black blob. Dr. Shapiro noted the incident in her file. She noted that Connor had become agitated when questioned about the drawing. She noted that he had requested to end the session early, complaining of a headache. She noted her concern that Connor might have witnessed something traumatic that he was not ready or able to discuss. But concern was not proof. Notes in a therapist's file were not evidence, and so the years continued to pass. Sarah Morrison remained missing. Her case remained open, and the people who had known her carried their suspicions and their grief forward into an uncertain future. By 2013, Emma was 14 and Connor was 11. David had moved them again, this time to a house he purchased in Southborough. Jennifer's visitation had been reduced to once monthly after David claimed her questioning was causing emotional distress to the children. Jennifer felt she was losing them, watching them disappear into a life built on silence and secrets. Part 4. The Revelation. In September 2014, 6 years and 7 months after Sarah Morrison vanished, Connor Morrison, now 12 years old, told his school guidance counselor that he needed to talk about something important. The counselor, Mrs. Ellen Bradley, sat down with him in her small office on a Tuesday afternoon. Connor was quiet at first, looking at his hands, picking at his fingernails. Mrs. Bradley asked if everything was okay at home. Connor nodded. She asked if he was having trouble with classes or other students. He shook his head. She waited. The silence stretched out. Then Connor said, "I remember the morning my mom went away." Mrs. Bradley felt her pulse quicken. She kept her voice calm, neutral. She said that must be difficult to think about. Connor nodded. He said he had not told anyone before because he was scared. She asked what he was scared of. He said he was scared his dad would be mad. Connor said that on the morning his mom disappeared, he had forgotten his homework folder upstairs. He said the bus came early that day, earlier than usual, and Emma was already running down the street to catch it. He said he ran back into the house through the front door to grab his folder from his room. He said his dad had not left for work yet, even though Connor thought he had. He said his dad's car was still in the garage. Connor said he heard his parents arguing in the kitchen. He said he heard his mom say she wanted him to leave, she wanted him out of the house. He said he heard his dad's voice, loud and angry, saying something Connor could not make out. He said he heard a sound like something falling or being knocked over. He said he got scared. Connor said he grabbed his folder and ran back outside without going into the kitchen. He said he caught the bus right as it was about to pull away. He said Emma asked where he had been, and he said he forgot his homework. He said he did not tell Emma what he had heard because he did not want to worry her. Connor said that, when he got home from school that day, his dad was there with the police. He said his dad looked at him in a way that made Connor feel like he should not say anything about that morning. He said he kept quiet because he was afraid he had done something wrong by going back in the house. He said as time went on, it got harder to say anything because he felt like he had lied by not telling the truth right away. Mrs. Bradley called the Department of Children and Families immediately after Connor left her office. DCF called the Ashland Police Department. Detective Sergeant Thomas Brennan, who had retired from the state police but was consulting on cold cases, received a call from the current lead investigator, Detective Amy Walsh. Within 48 hours, investigators had obtained a warrant to re-interview Connor with trained forensic interviewers present. The interview took place at a child advocacy center in Framingham. Connor repeated what he had told Mrs. Bradley. He provided additional details. He said he had heard his mother say, "You are hurting me." He said he heard his father say, just stop talking." Emma Morrison, now 16, was interviewed separately. She said she had been at the bus stop and had seen Connor run back to the house. She said she had not thought anything of it at the time. She said Connor had seemed nervous and quiet that day, but she had assumed it was because he had almost missed the bus. She said Connor had never told her what he heard in the kitchen. Investigators obtained a new warrant to search the Southborough house. They brought cadaver dogs again. This time, the dogs alerted in the garage, specifically near where David Morrison parked his current vehicle, a 2012 Ford Explorer. Forensic teams excavated the concrete floor. They found nothing, but the new testimony from Connor changed everything. Investigators revisited David Morrison's timeline from February 7, 2008. They now knew that David had still been at the house when the school bus arrived, which was at 7:55. They knew Connor had gone back inside the house and heard an argument. If the argument had turned violent, if Sarah had been injured or killed at that time, David would have had to deal with the immediate aftermath, which would have taken time. Working backward from his security badge swipe at 8:27 at the Worcester warehouse, and accounting for the traffic backup on the Mass Pike that morning, Investigators calculated that David would have needed to leave Ashland no later than 7:30 to arrive on time, and even that would have been tight. But Connor's testimony placed David at the house at 7:55 or later. There was only one explanation. David had not taken his usual route to work that morning. He had taken a different route, one that avoided the Mass Pike entirely. Route 9 west to I-495 north to Route 290 would have bypassed the traffic completely. It was a longer distance, but that morning might have been faster. Investigators pulled traffic camera footage from Route 9 and I-495 from February 7, 2008. The footage was stored on physical media in archives, grainy and difficult to enhance. But there, captured at 8:07 on a camera at the Route 9 and I-495 interchange, was a Honda Accord matching the description of David Morrison's vehicle. The license plate was not fully legible, but the make, model, and color matched. If David had been at that location at 8:07, he could have reached Worcester by 8:27. The timeline worked, but it also meant he had lied about when he left the house. It meant he had been there during the time Connor heard the argument. It meant everything he had told investigators about that morning was false. On October 22, 2014, Detective Walsh and 3 other investigators arrived at David Morrison's workplace in Worcester. They arrested him in the parking lot as he walked to his vehicle after his shift. He did not resist. He did not ask why. He simply put his hands behind his back as they placed the handcuffs on his wrists. David Morrison was charged with murder in the 2nd degree in the disappearance of Sarah Morrison. The district attorney acknowledged that Sarah's body had not been found, but stated that the totality of evidence, including Connor's eyewitness testimony to the argument, David's false statements about his timeline, and the traffic camera evidence showing he took a different route to work, established probable cause. The arrest made national news. Cable networks ran segments about the cold case cracked by a child's long-held secret. Reporters interviewed former neighbors from Haven Street, who expressed shock or vindication depending on what they had believed all along. Jennifer Caldwell stood before cameras and said she hoped her sister could finally rest in peace, wherever she was. David Morrison pleaded not guilty. His attorney argued that Connor's memories after 6 years could not be reliable, that a child's recollection was easily influenced by suggestion and time. The attorney argued that taking a different route to work did not prove David had harmed his wife, only that he had not been forthcoming about his exact movements, possibly because he panicked when she disappeared and feared being blamed. The trial began in April 2016. Connor Morrison, now 13, testified in a closed courtroom with his therapist present. He repeated what he had told the guidance counselor and investigators. He described hearing his mother say his father was hurting her. He described running out of the house, frightened, not understanding what was happening. Under cross-examination, the defense attorney pressed Connor on the details. How could he be sure of what he heard? Wasn't it possible he had misremembered after so many years? Wasn't it possible he had heard an argument but not the specific words he now claimed? Connor said no, he remembered it clearly. It had been in his head all this time. The prosecution presented the timeline evidence. They showed that David could not have left when he claimed and arrived at work on time while encountering the Mass Pike traffic. They showed the traffic camera footage of the vehicle matching David's car taking the alternate route. They presented testimony from Jennifer Caldwell about Sarah's intention to separate. They presented Connor's testimony about what he heard. The defense presented testimony from David's coworkers confirming he had been at work that morning. They presented a psychologist who testified about the unreliability of childhood memories, especially when those memories were recalled years after the event. They argued that the prosecution had not proven what happened to Sarah, only that David had not been entirely truthful about his movements that morning. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On April 29, 2016, they returned a verdict, guilty of murder in the second degree. David Morrison showed no reaction as the verdict was read. He stared straight ahead, his face expressionless. Emma Morrison, who had attended parts of the trial, sat in the gallery with Jennifer Caldwell and wept silently. Connor had not been present for the verdict, following the advice of his therapist. At sentencing in June 2016, the judge addressed David Morrison directly. He said that while Sarah's body had never been found, the evidence clearly established that David had caused her death and had concealed what he had done. He said that David's children had been forced to live with uncertainty and fear for years because of his actions. He sentenced David to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. To this day, Sarah Morrison's remains have not been located. Investigators believe David disposed of her body somewhere between Ashland and Worcester on his drive to work that morning, possibly in one of the wooded areas along Route 495 or in the Wachusett Reservoir. Searches have been conducted periodically based on tips and David's possible route, but nothing has been found. David Morrison maintains his innocence. He has filed appeals, all unsuccessful. He has never provided any information about what happened to Sarah or where she might be. Emma and Connor Morrison live with Jennifer Caldwell, who was granted full custody after David's conviction. Connor continues in therapy. Emma is now in college. Both have chosen to keep their lives private, declining interview requests. Closing. The case of Sarah Morrison represents both justice achieved and justice incomplete. A man was held accountable for a crime proven by his own lies and his son's courage to finally speak. But a family still lacks the closure that comes from being able to lay their loved one to rest. Somewhere in Massachusetts, Sarah Morrison's final resting place remains unknown, a secret her husband has chosen to keep. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.